We spent the last weeks and months building a kitchen completely from scratch. We've designed, built, finished, and assembled the whole thing, and all that's left is the last big part, which is the countertop. And that's what we're gonna build today, which I'm really excited for because the material that we'll be working with is really cool. Okay, so now what is this material that we're gonna build our countertops out of? This particular brand is called Hymax, but there's also different variations, most commonly known as Corian. Now, what it essentially is a really dense acrylic plastic that is made to look like stone. They come in all sorts of colors and variations and patterns. This one has some marbling to it, which I think is gonna go really well with the dark colored wood of the kitchen. So what are the benefits of using a material like this? Well, there is one really big one, and that is that in theory, you can glue these without having any visible seam. Now, that is gonna require some special glue that is color matched to the material and probably some skills. So we'll see how we'll do. Now, why is that so important for us? Well, these boards only come in one width, and that is about 70 centimeters. Now, our kitchen island is gonna be a lot wider than that. So we'll need to glue a couple of these together, and hopefully doing so without having the seam be noticeable after. That also brings me to the first thing that we need to do, which is cut this piece into a bit more manageable sizes so we can start gluing pieces together. Luckily, that's pretty easy because another benefit is that this material can be cut usually with pretty regular wood tools. And now let's jump right into trying to figure out how we're gonna attach these two things together. The first issue that we'll run into is that this particular board has a sort of pattern to make it sort of look like marble. And whereas with a solid color or an even pattern, it should be pretty easy to glue these things without getting a visible seam, here we're also fighting against the general pattern. Now, it's pretty close, but as you can see, depending on where I shift this or what orientation I place this thing in, the seam, because of the shift in color and pattern, will be slightly visible. Now, although I've worked a little bit with this type of material before, I've never done anything with this sort of marbling, so I really don't know if that's gonna turn into an issue later on. Guess we'll find out. But apart from that, the first issue that we need to solve is getting these two as tight as possible. Although these two factory edges are pretty straight, they're not exactly perfect. And in some spots, you can see a teeny tiny gap. Now, from what I've seen on the internet, there's a couple of different ways to go about this. Most people seem to recommend using a router with a straight cut router bit, routering both pieces at the same time to create a perfect match. Now, I'm thinking that that is probably gonna work, but I'm also thinking that if it works with the saw, that's gonna be faster. So that's what we're trying first. Both pieces are fully squished together so that with one cut, we should hopefully cut both parts. I mean, I feel like it for the most part is pretty good, but then in some places not really. Oh well, that's perfect. All right, now we know why that is the preferred method. This seam is flawless. The way I went about doing that is that I lined up one straight edge so that the router would just slightly cut into one piece. Then I used the spacer block, which is slightly thinner than the router's thickness, to align the second piece and clamp it in place. So that one pass with the router did both sides and they both end up perfect. Okay, bear with me here. This particular part I've never done before, but what I'm doing now is gluing on some wooden blocks that I'll use to clamp the two pieces together once we go to glue the whole thing. And yes, this is hot melt glue, and I really hope that these pieces come back off. And I guess here goes nothing. I've got the glue that is supposedly color matched to this exact color sheet. It's a two-part glue with this really cool nozzle that mixes A and B as you push it out. Now, from experience, the last time I used this is some of the worst smelling stuff that I've ever used, so I'm gonna use a mask for this. Fingers crossed. And now we're on the clock. All right, well, it is glued. It's the day after. It does feel like both pieces are stuck together and they didn't stick to the table. I managed to knock off the blocks pretty easy and scrape away the remaining glue with a chisel, but that's not to say that this process wasn't stressful. I don't think I anticipated how quickly this stuff sets up, which is literal minutes. That meant that I didn't have enough clamps ready to clamp the sheets down to the table as they were folding up. I think it's okay, but I also think that I used way too much glue. So to take off the worst part, I've glued a couple of strips of wood onto the bottom of my router, set the height just slightly above, and we'll try to router away as much of this mess as possible. Now that is already a lot better. But now for a real test, sanding. Are you guys seeing this? Because in the right place, the seam is absolutely impossible to spot. Now, because of the nature of this particular color and these types of sheets with the marbling, there are some places where you can see the seam where the marbling just doesn't match up. Especially in the few bright white areas, you can kind of see it. But in the areas where it's a bit more random and doesn't have abrupt color changes, it's flawless. I'm really happy with all this. Now, how did I get it so perfectly smooth? Well, I started sanding with 80 grit and then worked all the way up to 500. Now it's a nice satin finish and plenty good enough to move on. This does still have a bit of an odd shape to go on the side of the island. Now luckily, this stuff cuts really nice, not only with my track saw, but also on my big table saw. So I've already gone ahead and squared up the whole thing. I've cut it to size width-wise. I'll leave it a little bit long so I can trim off the exact height back home. But what I will do is cut a 45-degree angle on the top so I can glue two of these sheets together at the corner to make it look like the countertop goes all the way from the top surface, folds down and goes all the way down to the floor. But first, a quick ad for today's sponsor, Brilliant. Now, Brilliant.org is the best way to learn data science, computer science, and math interactively. They have thousands of lessons, everything from basic to advanced, with new lessons being added monthly. In their new How Technology Works course, you can explore topics like what actually makes a password good and how do algorithms know what you like to watch. It's like having your own personal learning coach that helps you out with explanations along the way so that you're never left guessing. Another course that I really like is called Scientific Thinking, where you can learn about how the stuff around you actually works. And if you're into building stuff like I am, you can learn a ton of really cool and useful things here. You can learn about everything from how gears work to light and relativity. You can learn on the go and learn something new. Brilliant works on both desktop and mobile. You can get started for free for 30 days, and you can now get 20% off an annual plan by visiting brilliant.org/ALCH. On to the second piece that we'll need to glue, and the last one for this particular project. That is gonna be the top for the island itself. Same problem, sheet's not big enough, we need to extend it by the same exact amount as we did the side. And although I've now done it once before, I feel a bit better prepared, but this one is quite a bit larger. And since the challenge the last time was to keep these flat on the table, this time I've got a bit of help with gravity from these two big chunks of just steel. They're super heavy. I've glued on the same blocks, I'll do everything as last time, just hopefully with a bit of more clamps ready to go to clamp everything in place. And yes, I was right. This stuff smells so bad. Well, I feel like that went marginally better. It was a bit better prepared, but that whole experience was super stressful. Oh God, these are heavy. I had Will to try and lift one of these, which was pretty funny. Oh God, I don't think I can do this. Oh. All right, let's do some sanding and see how we did. Now, talking about sanding, I just have to say a quick thank you to Mirka. They made my life so much easier. Many of you already know this. I think this is the best sander in the world. I paid my own money for this, but they did provide me with all the sandpaper, all the different grits, as well as polishing compound. And what I can honestly say is probably the best vacuum cleaner I've ever used. We can do the final sanding at the end once we've cut the final shape. For now, I've traced out the outline of the shape. Let's start cutting this thing to size. And here I was, literally just talking about dust extractors. I feel like it would have been a good idea to connect that thing. Anyways, the end of the kitchen island has this curve curving in towards the window. Naturally, the top is also going to repeat that. Now, all that's really left to do on this is to give everything a slight chamfer, sand it a whole bunch, and then we're going to put a big hole into it for the stovetop. And we'll do that using a tool I haven't used in a really long time, and that is my Avid CNC machine. It's actually been over a year since I used this thing last, so my confidence in cutting into a piece like this isn't as high as I'd like it to be, but I think I got everything loaded up. I think I've aligned it properly. I did that with some alignment pins that I drilled into the table and shoved the thing up against it. So, fingers crossed. I'll let Wilda press the buttons so that I can blame her if something goes wrong. Okay, go for it. Doing something. I think that worked. Next up, cutting out the actual hole. Well, that was more stressful than I would have liked it to be, but I think it worked. On to the next piece. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, you don't necessarily need to use fancy tools like a CNC machine to make those cutouts, like I'll do here for the sink. This is the sink that I'll use, and I've marked up its location and size perfectly onto the sheet here. I'll start by cutting out a hole that's slightly too small by drilling a couple of holes and then cutting out the rest of the sides with the track saw. Leaves us with a hole roughly where the sink is gonna be. Onto the bottom of which we can glue the sink with a healthy amount of construction adhesive and some wood blocks glued in place to help alignment. We'll glue this thing in place. And just like that, we're back in the apartment. And I gotta tell you, it felt so good finally getting the last large pieces of this kitchen into the apartment, seeing how everything mashes together. And before you get to see that, we need to somehow figure out how to get this thing somehow wedged in here with everything attached. Because like always, I made my life way harder than it needs to be. And the countertop needs to slide in underneath this section here. Okay, wish us luck. Check it out! Okay, we're getting very excited here. That is because it went first try, and I mean, just a look at the fit here. And now we get to do it all again, just this time with glue. Really don't need that much. Heavy? Okay, and then we just put something heavy on top. Okay, you stay there until tomorrow. And while the glue on the back part is setting up, let's continue with the kitchen island. And since this thing had to fit around it into the window here, which sits at an angle, I cut the whole thing quite a bit oversized back in the workshop. I then slowly, bit by bit, cut away pieces until it fit. And that's where we're now. It's perfectly lined up, everything fits, the gaps are pretty much perfect. So the big question now is, will the stovetop fit? We'll have the centerpiece in place with the tabs attached to give it a bit more rigidity when we carry it up here. Those will have to go now. Haha! Oh! That's one of my very first YouTube videos. Wow.
Oh my god!
Now that's about as long as that fun will last because we have to take it back out because we're gonna have to glue.
No! We're good. We're good.
So gluing the top and the side and everything together is gonna be quite the challenge because we want the side piece to be glued the same way as I glued the countertop pieces earlier. So we've cut both of these in a 45 and we're with that special glue gonna glue these together. While at the same time gluing this piece to the frame itself and the top to the frame itself with that construction adhesive that we just did with the back wall. I'm a bit worried about the glue spilling everywhere, so we've masked off everything that we can. We've got a bunch of clamps ready, and we'll glue on a couple of blocks to help us clamp the miter in place. Okay, you ready? Nice! That's never coming back off. And again, construction adhesive. And that's a terrifying bit, gluing that in place while at the same time composite gluing the countertop. Nope. Perfect, thank you. Tell you what, that was stressful, and it took about every clamp that I own to clamp all this in place properly. But it's the next time now. We removed all the clamps, took off all the masking tape, which I'm really happy that we spent so much time putting on because we managed to not get any glue anywhere that it wasn't supposed to go. And just look at this corner. Doesn't this just look absolutely fantastic? Now, although I've heard that you're not supposed to use a chisel to chisel away the excess glue, decided to try it anyways, and it worked out beautifully. I was able to clean up most of it just like that, and then the rest was again just standing through the grits. I did have a few bubbles here and there that I had to refill with a bit of extra glue and sand that back smooth. I've also rounded off this corner nicely and followed the chamfer all the way along the edge. Now for the back wall, first off, well, the plumber was just here and we've now got a sink and running water. That also means that we, for the first time since we're moving into this place, have a dishwasher. Who would have thought that you'd be that excited about being able to finally wash your dishes? Now, as opposed to the last time you saw this sink, the hole here is a whole lot nicer. Once the glue is set, I flipped it back over in the workshop and used a router with a following bit and followed all the way along this edge to get a perfect outline. And of course, I also ran a nice chamfer around the edge. And now there's just one last thing remaining. The piece I'm gluing up against the wall is the cutoff from the big one that's on the top surface. I've also sanded it to match all the other surfaces. Now, all that's left to do is glue it in place. And wow. It's the day after, the glue's set, and we're finally done with a huge new part of our kitchen. Now, of course, there's some minor little things that are still left, like that hole over there, which we're gonna deal with in the next video, and maybe like a shelf up there. Let me know what you think. As you can see, the stove is back in place. This time around, we've actually properly glued it in. The whole thing is perfectly flush with the counter. The glue seam ended up really nice. I'm really happy with it. Now, it's not connected yet, so now quite fully functioning kitchen, I guess. But hey, details. One of my favorite things with this kitchen is actually the overhang here and how it follows and goes in towards the window opening. And the way I anchored it with epoxy in between all these layers, now that there's construction adhesive in between here, I would say that's strong enough. Now, earlier in the video, I talked about the different levels of sandpaper grit and different levels of shine that you can achieve on these types of countertops. After a lot of testing, sanding through the grits all the way from like 320, which leaves a pretty rough surface, up to polished, what we finally landed on and what this is right now is 600 grit. For us, that's the sweet spot of not having it too shiny where it's super reflective and scratches are really visible, but still having a nice and even shine. But I think that's it for this video. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. See you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.